Hey guys, welcome into the 14. I'm Nick Cole, and we're breaking down each SEC football game in week 13 from a betting perspective. Today, we're talking about the Missouri Tigers visiting the Arkansas Razorbacks. This game's going to be played on Friday, November 26th. Kickoff's at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time, and the game is going to be played at Razorback Stadium in Fayetteville, Arkansas, and TV for this one will be on CBS. From a betting perspective, Arkansas opened as a 16-point favorite. And as of the recording of this video, that line's down to 14.5. The total for the game opened at 62.5, and that's held firm as of this recording. I'll bring in our betting analyst, Christopher Smith. Christopher, this is one of those games that kind of the Thanksgiving hangover right before the big rivalry Saturday, a good opportunity to sit down and make a bet, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have my paper that I handwrite the lines on right in front of me, but I think on Friday there's two games on Thanksgiving. There's the Egg Bowl and San Jose State, I believe, plays. But on Friday, there's double-digit games. I think there might be 12 games, something like that, on Friday. Plus, you've got even more of the big Thanksgiving week college basketball tournaments to bet on. I know Alabama is in one of those here in Orlando. There's a lot of other schools. So actually, if you like betting on college football and college basketball, this Friday game with Missouri Arkansas is part of maybe the best day of the year for college football and basketball betting. So that's always exciting. But Nick, why don't you tell us about what the weather is going to be like, injuries, and Nick's news and notes?
Sure. So let's start with the weather. Friday afternoon in Fayetteville, we're looking at temperatures in the 50s at kickoff, but probably creeping down to the 40s by the end of the day as the sun goes down. We're going to have low chance of rain. No, it really should be sunny, but the thing to watch for on the forecast on this one is the wind. We're showing 10 to 12 miles per hour forecasted as of kickoff. And so that's right in the range where we start getting concerned about it impacting the total for a game. So you'll want to check that just to be sure right before you make your bets on Friday afternoon. From an injury standpoint, let's start with Arkansas. Obviously, the guy that everybody's most worried about coming out of that Alabama game is wide receiver Treylon Burks, who was clearly visibly in pain for most of that game, scored a touchdown, couldn't even muster a celebration. And then he took a really big hit late on an onside kick attempt. Will Anderson lit him up pretty good. And for a guy that was already dealing with a core injury, you got to wonder if that put him in an extra deal of pain and recovery this week, as he's got a short turnaround time for this game. But hopefully he'll be back close to full strength as possible for this game, because he's sure a fun guy to watch in the league this year. On the Missouri side of things, they were missing 5 defensive backs against Florida last week due to injury. And so it's unclear how many of those, if any of them, will be coming back for this game. That's one to watch on Friday as guys get suited up, see who's playing, who's not, because a banged up secondary could impact this one, as we figured out Arkansas maybe can throw the ball every now and then. It brings me to our news and notes. Let's start talking about this. Is obviously rivalry week. We're going through each game from a betting perspective in the SEC and hitting all these great rivalries. This is actually one of the newer ones. It's called the Battle Line rivalry. The games have been played just 12 times, which when you compare it to the Egg Bowl, the Iron Bowl, some of those other big in-state rivalry games, this one's doesn't have quite the history or the allure to it, but it has its own trophy. Missouri's actually won the last 5 games in this contest, and they're 5-1 against Arkansas since this became that mandatory conference sanctioned game back in 2014. Arkansas most recently broke a very similar losing streak in a rivalry game that has a very similar trophy. They reclaimed the boot against LSU a couple weeks ago. So, they got the boot back in Northwest Arkansas. They'd like to get the Battle Line trophy back as well, and get things where they need to be in year 2 of Stan Pittman's regime there. On the Mizzou side of things, they kind of, I don't know if I would say surprised anybody, but they sure did help Florida fans in week 12 there, when they beat the Gators in overtime to become bowl eligible under Eli Drinkwitz in year 2. And also in the process got Florida coach Dan Mullen fired, which interestingly enough, Christopher, I wanted to run through this real fast. Longtime Mizzou beat writer Dave Matter put this out the other day. But coaches that have been immediately fired after losing to Mizzou in the last decade, you've got Dan Mullen, Derek Mason, Brett Bielema, Butch Jones, and then Derek Dooley and Joker Phillips were both fired the week after they lost to Missouri. So Missouri is the new death knell for coaches that are on the hot seat in the league, and Dan Mullen is the latest victim. But big win for the Tigers. And I think earlier in the season, the way their defense was playing, we weren't so sure they'd see the postseason, but now they're sitting at 6-5 and they got a chance for a 7-win regular season here if they go to Arkansas and pull off the upset. On the other hand, we got Arkansas, who is perhaps more fired up over the result of their game last week, and they lost. Now they lost 42-35 to Alabama at Bryant-Denny Stadium, and we actually saw some interesting things from the Hogs. They threw for 358 yards, which is, for a rush-heavy offense, one of the best rushing offenses in the league. Showed that they can adapt late in the season here. We watched them earlier in the season against Georgia get the run stopped early and could not throw the ball well enough to hang with the Bulldogs and got shut out. So this was a similar, I think Georgia's defense may be a little bit better than Alabama's, but still to go on the road, score 35 points, figure out how to move the ball through the air, get the ball to Treylon Burks, in spite of the running game maybe being limited against the Tides defense, was an encouraging sign for the Hogs. However, this is an important one. The Hogs defense gave up 671 total yards of offense to Alabama last week, and that includes 559 passing yards from Bryce Young that may have actually garnered him some Heisman Trophy votes. So much for that bend, don't break defense we've been talking about from the Hogs. Bryce Young may have broke it. Christopher, is that what you saw out of that defense last week?
Yeah, I did. And I did look up. There's actually 16 college football games on Friday, so huge slate. But, to me, the bigger headline or the most surprising thing that I've noticed between either of these teams in the last few weeks is the Missouri run defense. And they played well against Georgia. I mean, they did have they had two receiver carries that went for kind of pretty big yardage and kind of threw things off. But at the time, I noticed that James Cook, Zamir Wyatt, and Kenny McIntosh only had 2.7 yards per carry against Missouri. And at that point, we were talking about Missouri maybe as an all-time worst SEC run defense. So, I wasn't totally ready to buy in at that point just because maybe it was a one-game fluke but it definitely caught my attention. The scheme that Arkansas plays is usually pretty friendly for running backs because they often have 3 down linemen and they have 2 deep safeties, and they drop a lot of players into zone coverage and basically say, we're going to keep everything in front of us. We're not going to let you beat us over the top with explosive passing plays. Usually that leads to some pretty good spaces for running backs, but Arkansas's 29th in EPA per snap against the run, 57th in yards per attempt, 24th in power success rate, 41st in stuff rate. Those are not Alabama numbers, or those are not, Georgia numbers, but pretty decent, especially considering the scheme. And we know for Missouri that as long as Tyler Beatty can walk, the team is going to force feed him the football. He had 29 plus touches in 4 of the team's last 5 games. So not expecting Arkansas to shut him out, but Arkansas's defense should play pretty well against him. The game and the total, as it has for a lot of the games recently for Arkansas, probably does come down to Treylon Burks, who you mentioned. I think that's one of the reasons it's probably hard, unless you're on Twitter or following Arkansas beat writers, to know exactly what his status is for this game. This may be a game that you want to wait until sort of close to kickoff, or whenever you do get some more definitive news around Burks to bet on. And you mentioned that Missouri is missing 5 injured defensive backs. That's not what you want to have on the field when you're facing Burks. So I think Burks's health and whether or not Burks gets a lot of work in this game will determine almost everything about this matchup. But Nick, how are you betting this? But maybe more importantly, do you have any ways that people can make some extra money betting this week?
Funny you should ask, Christopher. I actually do. And since we're entering rivalry week, this is probably a really good time to look at a way to expand the amount of money that you have to place on bets in college football. And our deal with Action 24/7, our sponsorship with their Tennessee-based sportsbook here, is a great way to do it. They've got a special deal for new customers. For a limited time, you can get your deposit matched 100% up to $800. And so if you sign up today and make your first deposit using code SOUTH14, that's SOUTH14, Action will double your money up to $800. So download the app and visit action247.com to get things started. Action 24/7 is by Tennesseans for Tennesseans. You've got action. And Christopher, when we talk about my action this season in general on this show, more times than not, I've been bullish on betting on Arkansas. Last week, that paid off for me. taking, I think we had plus 20.5, and they covered that against the Crimson Tide fairly easily, surprisingly enough. But this week, I'm not so keen on laying more than 2 touchdowns to Mizzou in this game. Even though I know Arkansas has had pretty good success at home this year, and this is a matchup that they should win. I do agree that the Hogs should win this game outright. But if you look back at their schedule, Arkansas Pine Bluff is the only team that Arkansas has beaten by more than 2 touchdowns since mid-September. So they've been playing pretty tight games throughout the conference schedule. So for that reason, I'm going to take Missouri plus 14.5 and figure that the Tigers will find a way to keep it within 2 touchdowns. I like the under 62.5 in this game too, just sort of following a game script that helps Missouri cover. I think both of these teams, if they had their way, would prefer to run the ball, which should ultimately lead to fewer possessions, perhaps. And 62.5 is a pretty big number, really, for a conference game. So I'm going to try to go the under there. How do you feel about this one?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Arkansas may be getting sort of misrated right now. I know to a degree, sort of casual bettors often look at the loss column, right? So you see the number 4 in the loss column for Arkansas now. But I mean, they lost to Alabama, they lost to Georgia. They had a coin flip game with Ole Miss that they're 2-point conversion away from winning. They probably should have won. I thought they mostly outplayed Ole Miss in that game. And then they had a game with a fluke score against Auburn where they outgained the Tigers and they had 9 more first downs than Auburn. So I think this is an Arkansas team that I have actually in my top 15 of my power rankings. And, Missouri's run defense is the thing that, and also Burks' health is the thing that kind of are the trends that maybe give me a little pause here. I'm definitely taking Arkansas minus 14.5. And I like the under 62.5. Mostly because, I mean, if you run the ball 65% of the time and suddenly Missouri's playing Missouri's playing like a top 40 run defense in the country right now, shockingly. And if that holds for this game, I think the under would probably have some value, especially if Burks is not 100%. But for me, the reason I'm taking Arkansas is even though Missouri has been playing better football, I think the Hogs are underrated in the marketplace. And I think the gap between them and Missouri is, the gap between Arkansas and Alabama is a lot smaller to me than the gap between Arkansas and Missouri right now. So give me the Hogs. Nick has Missouri. And for Nick Cole, I'm Christopher Smith for the 14, and we'll talk to you later.